over the Persian Gulf has never felt peaceful, but this morning, the silence carries a more terrifying weight than ever before. Amidst the rolling waves of one of the most critical waterways on the planet, a $2 billion fortress of the United States Navy cuts through the water. It is a symbol of absolute power, a masterpiece of modern technology equipped with radar systems capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously and interceptor missiles worth a fortune. However, deep within the Iranian mainland, a different reality is being prepared. It is not a fleet of massive ballistic missiles or next-generation stealth fighters, but rather small, crude, unmanned aerial vehicles with a price tag of only $500. This staggering discrepancy is not just an economic puzzle, it is becoming a deadly trap, a nightmare scenario that Pentagon strategists never truly wanted to face. The conflict between the United States and Iran has entered a new phase, where the old rules of engagement are being torn apart and replaced by a chilling concept known as asymmetric warfare. The alarms on the deck of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer sound urgently as the Aegis defense system detects strange objects approaching. On the digital screens, they appear only as small dots, moving at a slow pace, looking no different from migrating birds or children's toy planes. But that is the first fatal mistake. These kamikaze drones are built from components easily purchased on commercial websites, powered by lawnmower engines, and guided by cheap civilian navigation systems. When a $500 drone is shot down by a $2 million interceptor missile, it is not a victory for America, but an economic defeat. And when hundreds or even thousands of such drones are launched simultaneously in a swarm attack, the world's most expensive defense system begins to reveal irreparable gaps. Chaos spreads as one of these flying toys bypasses the final line of defense, crashing directly into the destroyer's main radar array, turning a $2 billion warship into a blind hunk of steel in hostile waters. This event is not just a loss of hardware, it is a massive blow to the prestige of the world's most powerful military. While Tehran is reeling under devastating American and Israeli bombing campaigns, as recent reports indicate, Iran is proving on the seas that they can make their opponent pay an astronomical price with the cheapest means possible. Geopolitical experts are beginning to question the effectiveness of massive military investments when faced with the destructive creativity of an adversary. Is the United States following the failed footsteps of Afghanistan or entering a war of attrition similar to what happened in Venezuela? The answer lies in the scraps of plastic and cheap metal drifting in the Gulf. This is no longer a game for technological giants, but a war of strategic thinking, where the weaker side has found a way to neutralize the strength of the powerful through unbelievable simplicity. The world holds its breath, because if a $2 billion ship can be humbled by a $500 device, the entire map of global power is about to be redrawn. Behind the smoke and mirrors of high-tech warfare lies a grim reality that the world's superpowers have long ignored. For decades, the United States has focused on building the most sophisticated, expensive, and powerful military machine in human history. From the depths of the ocean to the heights of the stratosphere, American dominance was thought to be absolute. But the waters of the Middle East are now proving that a giant can be brought to its knees not by another giant, but by a swarm of angry hornets. These hornets are the small, inexpensive drones that Iran has perfected over years of sanctions and isolation. When the supreme leader was reported killed, and Tehran faced the wrath of American and Israeli airstrikes, many expected the Iranian military to crumble. Instead, they unleashed a strategy that had been decades in the making. This is the art of asymmetric warfare at its most brutal. It is a calculation where the cost of defense far outweighs the cost of offense, creating an economic black hole that threatens to swallow the military budget of the world's largest economy. Each drone, a simple machine of fiberglass and plastic, represents a terrifying evolution in combat. They do not require highly trained pilots or multi-billion-dollar airfields. They can be launched from the back of a pickup truck or a fishing boat, disappearing into the radar clutter of the coastline. The American destroyer, equipped with the most advanced sensors, is designed to fight a peer adversary, a country with its own high-tech jets and massive warships. It was never truly built to handle 1,000 tiny, low-flying targets that move just fast enough to be a threat, but slow enough to be mistaken for background noise. As the crew on the destroyer scrambled to respond, the realization hit home. To engage these threats, they had to use their most precious resource, the interceptor missiles. A single RIM 162 evolved Sea Sparrow missile costs over $1,700,000. To fire a dozen of these at a group of drones that cost less than a used car is a victory for the attacker, even if every drone is destroyed. It is a mathematical trap that drains the magazines and the treasury of the defender. The strategic implications are staggering. If Iran can sustain this level of pressure, the United States Navy faces a choice between retreating from strategic waterways or being slowly bled dry. The geopolitical balance of the region is shifting. While the world watched the dramatic footage of explosions over Tehran, the real battle was happening in the silence of the sea. Iran's toy drones have proven that technology is only as good as the strategy behind it. The collapse of the leadership in Tehran has not led to a collapse of their military resolve. If anything, the chaos has decentralized their command, allowing local units to launch these low-tech strikes with more autonomy and unpredictability. Experts are now warning that this is just the beginning. The $500 trap is a blueprint for every smaller nation looking to challenge a superpower. It is a world where the price of entry into the club of global influencers has dropped to the cost of a high-end smartphone. As the American destroyer limps back to port with its radar eyes gouged out, the message is clear. The age of invincibility is over, and the era of the swarm has arrived. The secret of Iran's success lies in the shadows of its decentralized manufacturing. For years, the world laughed at the grainy footage of Iranian drone tests, labeling them as nothing more than flying lawnmowers. But the laughter has died down in the corridors of the Pentagon. These devices are the ultimate manifestation of frugal innovation. By using commercial-grade global positioning systems and open-source flight control software, Tehran has bypassed the need for expensive military infrastructure. A single workshop, hidden beneath a nondescript apartment building in a provincial city, can produce dozens of these drones every week. They do not need a pilot in a cockpit. They only need a set of coordinates and a simple objective. This democratization of precision strike capability means that a nation under heavy bombardment can still project power hundreds of miles away. While the American and Israeli air forces are hunting for missile silos and command centers, the real threat is being assembled in 1,000 different locations, far from the reach of traditional intelligence gathering. On the deck of the stricken destroyer, the technical reality of the situation is even more harrowing. The Aegis combat system, often called the shield of the fleet, was designed to track supersonic cruise missiles and high-altitude bombers. Its sensors are so sensitive that they can detect a baseball moving at several times the speed of sound. However, this high sensitivity is exactly what the $500 drones exploit. By flying at very low altitudes and speeds that mimic the movement of large birds or even sea spray, these drones disappear into the background clutter of the radar. When hundreds of them are launched, the system faces what engineers call a saturation of the processing loop. The computers must decide in a fraction of a second which targets are real threats and which are just noise. In the chaos of the swarm, the probability of a leak, a single drone slipping through the net, increases exponentially. It only takes one small explosion to damage a sensitive radar array or a communication mast. Without its eyes and ears, the $2 billion ship becomes a massive, floating target, unable to defend itself or coordinate with the rest of the carrier strike group. The global trade implications of this tactical shift are catastrophic. The Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz are the jugular veins of the world economy. Every day, millions of barrels of oil and massive amounts of liquefied natural gas pass through these narrow waters. If a single destroyer can be disabled by a handful of cheap drones, no commercial tanker is safe. The insurance rates for shipping in the region have already skyrocketed to levels that make trade nearly impossible. This is the hidden dimension of the Iranian trap. They are not just attacking a ship, they are attacking the very foundations of global commerce. By proving that they can shut down the world's most important maritime choke point with the cost of a few dozen consumer electronics, Iran is exerting a level of leverage that no amount of traditional military force can easily counter. The United States now finds itself in a strategic dilemma: stay and risk the slow destruction of its prestige and its treasury, or leave and concede control of the global energy market to an unstable and vengeful regime. The world watches as the prices at the pump begin to rise, and the realization sets in that a few toy drones have more power to change the course of history than the world's most advanced aircraft carriers. Inside the Combat Information Center of the crippled destroyer, the air is thick with the smell of ozone and burnt insulation. This is the nerve center of the ship, a room filled with multi-million-dollar consoles that are now flickering with error messages. For the sailors stationed here, the shock is not just physical, it is existential. They have been trained to believe that they are untouchable, protected by a technological umbrella that could stop any conventional threat. But the $500 trap has shattered that illusion. The realization that a device built with components from a remote-controlled hobby shop could blind a titan of the seas is a psychological blow that will resonate through the ranks of the Navy for years. It reveals a fundamental flaw in Western military philosophy, which for decades has prioritized quality and complexity over quantity and resilience. While the United States spent billions perfecting a single shield, Iran spent a few $1,000s finding a way to throw enough stones to ensure that one would eventually hit the mark. The technical post-mortem of the attack is already being debated in the highest circles of power. Experts point out that the drones used are not sophisticated by any standard. They lack stealth coatings, high-speed engines, or advanced jamming pods. Instead, they rely on a concept known as mass saturation. By launching 40 or 50 drones at a single ship, the attacker forces the defender into a no-win situation. If the ship fires its missiles, it eventually runs out of ammunition, leaving it vulnerable to a second wave of heavier anti-ship missiles. If the ship tries to use its close-in weapon systems, like the Phalanx Gatling gun, it must wait until the drones are only a few hundred yards away. At that range, even a successful hit can shower the ship with debris, and a single mistake means a direct impact. In this case, the Iranian swarm was perfectly timed, coming from multiple directions and at different altitudes, effectively overwhelming the processing capacity of the crew and the computers. The political fallout in Washington is becoming a firestorm of its own. Critics of the current administration are pointing to this incident as proof that the United States is dangerously overextended. They argue that by engaging in a direct conflict with Iran after the reported death of the supreme leader, the nation has walked into a trap that combines the worst aspects of the Vietnam and Afghanistan wars. The financial burden of maintaining a carrier strike group in a high-threat environment is unsustainable. Each day, the fleet remains in the Gulf. It consumes millions of dollars in fuel and maintenance, all while being hunted by enemies who spend less on their entire drone program than the United States spends on a single fighter jet's spare parts. There is a growing sense of dread that this is not a war that can be won with bombs and missiles, but a war of attrition that will bankrupt the Treasury before it ever reaches a decisive conclusion. Meanwhile, America's regional allies are watching with a mixture of fear and recalculation. In Jerusalem, the news of the destroyer being disabled has sent shockwaves through the military establishment. If the United States Navy cannot protect its own assets, the security umbrella that Israel and the Gulf states have relied on for decades is suddenly in question. In Riyadh and Kuwait City, where American missions have already faced attacks, the atmosphere is one of siege. The message from Tehran is clear. No matter how many bombs fall on their cities, they have the means to reach out and touch their enemies anywhere in the region. The $500 trap is not just a tactical victory. It is a geopolitical weapon of mass disruption. It has proven that the cost of intervention in the Middle East has just become prohibitively high, and the world's only superpower is finding itself paralyzed by an enemy that refuses to play by the rules of the old world order. The disablement of a $2 billion destroyer is more than a tactical failure. It is a sign that the very foundation of American military intervention is crumbling. For years, the strategy of regime change has been the primary tool in the United States arsenal for dealing with hostile nations. The idea was simple: remove the head of the snake, and the body will die. When the news broke that the supreme leader of Iran had been killed in a joint American and Israeli strike, many in Washington believed the war was essentially over. President Trump even made a direct appeal to the Iranian people, telling them that the hour of their freedom was at hand and that they should seize the moment to take over their government. But the reality on the ground has been a cold shower for these ambitions. Instead of a swift collapse or a democratic uprising, the United States has found itself entangled in a conflict that looks less like a quick victory and more like a high-tech version of the Afghanistan nightmare. The $500 trap proves that the Iranian military has prepared for this exact scenario. By decentralizing their command and control, they have ensured that the death of a single leader, even one as powerful as the Ayatollah, does not stop the machinery of resistance. The drones that are currently harassing the United States Navy are not being launched by a central command that can be bombed into submission. They are being operated by small, independent cells that are nearly impossible to track or eliminate. This is the same decentralized model that allowed the Taliban to endure 20 years of American occupation. Every time a $2 million missile is used to kill a $500 drone, the United States is losing the war of attrition. The economic cost of staying in the region is becoming a political liability that the administration cannot ignore. While the rhetoric from the White House remains defiant, the financial reality is that the United States is being bled out one cheap plastic drone at a time. This shift in the nature of conflict highlights a massive intelligence failure. The United States and its allies calculated that Iran would react with conventional ballistic missiles or naval engagements, which could be easily countered by superior American technology. They did not fully grasp that the Iranian strategy had moved beyond traditional warfare into the realm of the permanent swarm. This is not a war that can be won by carpet bombing Tehran or Haifa or Tel Aviv. It is a war of numbers and costs. When the world's most powerful country tells its citizens to leave the Middle East immediately, but cannot guarantee their safe passage because the skies and seas are filled with invisible, cheap threats, the limits of superpower influence become painfully clear. The promise of liberation and democracy feels hollow when it is accompanied by the sound of cheap engines buzzing over a disabled warship. As the conflict continues, the comparison to Venezuela or Afghanistan is becoming more frequent in the halls of power. In Venezuela, the hope for a quick transition of power failed because the military remained loyal to the existing structures. In Afghanistan, the technological gap between the two sides was irrelevant because the enemy was willing to fight a long, low-cost war. Iran is combining these two lessons. They are using the $500 trap to make the cost of American presence so high that the only logical conclusion is a retreat. The world is witnessing the birth of a new era of global instability, where the barrier to entry for challenging a superpower has been lowered to the price of a consumer electronic. This is the true meaning of the Iranian trap. It is not just about a ship. It is about the end of the American century in the Middle East, as the giant finds itself unable to swat away the swarm that is slowly, methodically, draining its strength. As the shadows of the drone swarm fade into the sea mist, a new and unsettling reality begins to take shape for the strategic planners at the Pentagon. The $2 billion destroyer now sits motionless, not just because of physical damage, but because it has become a symbol of an obsolete military doctrine. The world is entering an era where overwhelming firepower and massive budgets no longer guarantee absolute victory. The $500 trap has proven that in a modern war of attrition, economic endurance, and mental flexibility are far more important than owning the most expensive hardware. Iran did not defeat the United States through brute force. They defeated them by turning every act of American self-defense into a financial failure. This is a costly lesson that not only the United States but all naval powers must seriously consider if they do not want to see their mighty fleets disabled by devices bought at toy stores. Looking to the future, this conflict has redrawn the map of power in the Middle East and beyond. Smaller nations and non-state actors are watching closely, realizing they do not need a massive air force or navy to challenge a superpower. The democratization of precision strike technology has empowered the weak in ways never seen before. Military experts predict that we will see a new arms race, where sides no longer focus on building larger ships or more expensive stealth jets, but on developing directed energy defense systems or their own drone swarms to counter the enemy. However, until those technologies are perfected and widely deployed, the advantage remains with those who can cause maximum damage at minimum cost. The United States now faces an epochal decision. Adapt to this asymmetric reality, or continue to waste resources on vulnerable platforms. In these final hours, as the destroyer is towed out of the danger zone under the protection of the remaining escorts, the silence on the deck speaks louder than any official report. It is the silence of shock and the recognition that the world has changed forever. The $500 drones did not just damage a radar mast. They cracked the confidence in the invincibility of the world's most powerful military. Iran has succeeded in creating a new kind of deterrence, one based on simplicity and sheer numbers. As the American and Israeli bombing campaigns over Tehran continue without a clear surrender, it is obvious that the enemy's morale and desperate creativity are variables that cannot be fully calculated on a computer. This war may last for many more days or weeks, but the psychological and strategic outcome was decided the moment that small drone bypassed a $2 billion defense shield. Ultimately, the $500 trap will go down in military history as a turning point similar to when aircraft first sank massive battleships. It marks the end of an era and the beginning of a new, uncertain, and dangerous chapter. The steel giants will still patrol the oceans, but they will always have to look at the sky with apprehension, knowing that any small, cheap object could carry the seeds of destruction. The Middle East remains a powder keg of geopolitical conflict, but the rules of the game have been fundamentally altered. As night falls over the Persian Gulf, the distant hum of drone engines continues to echo as a relentless reminder of the rise of the swarm and the high price of complacency. Today's battle may have ended, but the larger war for the future of global power has only just begun.